Well, hi, welcome to another Godcast. My name is Father Alex. I'm not just the host of the Godcast, but I'm also the vicar of St Matthew's Church in Burnley, and I'm also the author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar Pre-Story, which is published by Harper North and available Waterstones and online at Amazon. Just go check it out. About to listen to an interview with Reverend Tom Sander. He is the rector of St Giles-in-the-Fields in central London. He's been there since 2021, and he's also an Army Chaplain and Padre to the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment. So I do hope you're going to enjoy this interview now. And if you do enjoy it, please do hit the subscribe button in the right-hand corner of the screen. But for now, enjoy this interview with Reverend Tom Sander. Tom, it's fabulous to welcome you to the Godcast. How are you today?
Very well, very well. It's quite cold in London at the moment today, and I've got stuck in traffic earlier on because it's the state opening of Parliament, so I had to go down to Westminster to set up a garden of remembrance outside St Margaret's, Westminster. I got stuck in traffic, but it was exciting because I saw the King, so that was nice.
Do you instantly know when there's something big going on in the city? Do you just kind of get a feel?
Yeah, I had that in my diary, so but yeah, London's a funny place because lots can be happening and you can be completely unaware of it. So I live in like quite a quiet corner of Bloomsbury, but if you just walk down the end of my road, you've got Tottenham Court Road and Oxford Street. Um, I think Tottenham Court Road is the busiest tube station in London now, with the Elizabeth line. So you've got hundreds of thousands of people pouring out of there. So London is funny. It's like all in different parts, and completely different to where I came from before, which was out in the countryside in Hertfordshire. So really, really very different.
Yeah, well, we'll get to a little bit of that, and just for people who aren't aware, you're at St Giles in the Field. Just tell us a little bit about the context of that, Giles, if you would, for people who are perhaps discovering you for the first time today.
Yeah, so St Giles in the Fields is confused with St Martin's in the Fields, and we're not St Martin's in the Fields. St Martin's in the Fields is the very big church in the centre or just to the side of the National Gallery in Trafalgar Square. Um, I remember getting quite an irate telephone call off a woman who was standing outside St Giles. Said, "I've come for the Vivaldi concert, but it's not on today. The church is dark and no one's here." I said, "Well, are you sure you're at the right church?" She said, "Yeah, I'm standing outside your church now." I said, "Well, we don't ever do Vivaldi concerts, and I hate Vivaldi as it happens." But she said, "Oh well." I said, "Are you sure you don't mean St Martin's in the Fields?" She was like, "Well, that one." And I said, "Well, that's a different church, dear." She said, "Well, I wish you'd been clearer on your poster." It's just like,
Does it happen often?
it does happen a lot, actually.
Yeah.
But we're not St Martin's. St Giles is a really interesting place, and I always remember what my first church warden when I arrived here, which was about 3 years ago, said to me. He said that before there was London, there was St Giles. We really were in the fields. St Giles started life as a leper hospital in 1101, founded by Queen Matilda, who really had a heart for the outcast and the rejected. Um, and St Giles is patron saint of lepers and the outcasts. So you often find St Giles is on the edge of cities, and so we are on the edge. But of course, now through time, we're at the heart of the West End. I often say to people, if you were to drop a pin on the West End, like in the centre, it would land square on the spire of St Giles because we've got one side we've got Covent Garden, and a lot of theatre stuff, and then literally the other side of the road we've got Soho, and all of that. So we really are sort of in between these two places. And Peter Ackroyd, who was a great sort of London historian, said that St Giles stood at a number of crossroads. He said that we stand at the crossroads of time and eternity. And there really is a strong sense of, almost in the soil of the place, of being slightly on the edge, yet being at the centre. Life going on around us. There is a lot of history with condemned who were condemned and then brought through this part of London. They stopped for what was known as the Rector's Bowl. So one final drink at the Angel, which is the pub that's still next door to the church. They'd have one last drink there, which was courtesy of the parish, before being hung by the neck until dead up at Tyburn, which is now Marble Arch. So really, really interesting bit of London, really bit of interesting history. And of course, we had, every bit of London makes the claim of having the most notorious slum. St Giles really did have the most notorious slum. The Rooker is a very dangerous place to be. You wouldn't want to venture in there. We just had a book written actually about the social history of the parish of St Giles, which contains all sorts of anecdotes and interesting facts about the parish. But there's something deep in the soil here, and when I'm walking around at night through some of the smaller lanes around the parish, making my way home, you do get a sense of those old voices, street tellers, still speaking out almost from the stones. It's a magical place, actually.
Yeah, you've painted a really beautiful picture of it. I was going to ask you to explain that in the fields, and you've done that really lovely. So thank you. In terms of you in the line of priests, do you know how many priests have gone before you? How many rectors there've been and vicars or whatever title was given to them?
I've no idea. There is a board, as there is in every church.
Yeah.
There is a board. It's just about to be updated. The big question is, so all the names are in Latin. And the big question is whether we update the missing 3 names, which is myself, the previous incumbent, the one before that, in Latinized names, or in English. I haven't quite decided yet. I think I'm going to defer to the PCC to make the decision, because I'm not particularly fussed either way. But yeah, so we were under the care of the leper hospital until the Reformation, and then we became a parish church in our own right. So and with the 3rd church on the site. So there've been 2 churches before us. This one's 1734. So yeah.
And I guess where you are, Tom, is you've got the bright lights of the West End, haven't you, and all the glitz and glamour that perhaps goes with that, which is wonderful if you're in a position to be part of that scene. But I guess you also see the real opposite of that. You're in a city in London, and that will present its own problems. Just express what that looks like on a daily basis for you as the vicar there.
Yeah, I mean, the picture of homelessness, which is the word people always reach for when they're trying to describe this, but it's an unsatisfactory word, because it's not just about homelessness. It's about addiction. It's about not fitting into society. It's about a whole host of different things that people have got going on in their lives, including a lot of mental health. So the picture of life in the West End is one that's really, really complicated. And people who are in those situations tend to be drawn to the West End because it's busy and noisy, and actually there's safety in numbers. And for those people who visit for the first time, it can be quite alarming. But you have to deal with a sort of a strategy of coping with it. And one of the things that I think St Giles is particularly good at, which is something I've absolutely inherited and not my own making, is we work in collaboration with others, rather than try and do everything ourselves. We haven't started a soup kitchen, we haven't started a clothing bank or a food bank. Rather, we work alongside other charities to financially support them, to support them by giving them people, and also hosting them physically. So Saturdays is a big day for us here at St Giles. We have a trailer that pulls up with mobile facilities for people to wash and have a proper shower, hot shower. And then there's a meal provided by one of the local restaurants, excellent restaurant, in fact. And there's clothing and other things available. And my job actually on those days is to just be present and to start conversations and to talk to people. Because when you're living on the street, or when you find yourself on the street for whatever reason, all of the discussions you have are transactional. Would you like a cup of tea? I'll give you this. I'll sort you out with this. Actually, I'm not there to give anyone anything except my time and a conversation. Um, and it's nice to see the same people coming back, and then also, more importantly, to see them move on. Um, and the system is not great. I am literally lost for words at what I heard this week from the Home Secretary about tents and things. I'm like, have you ever met someone who lives on the street? I know people who live in tents by name and their circumstance. Most of them are working actually, like full time. They just can't get accommodation. It's and to say things like that is truly shocking, actually.
That is
Someone
a
who very rarely talks about
yeah.
politics.
For you to say that, I think is a really important thing to say in terms of social injustice. These are people who are working. These are people who've got jobs,
Yeah,
and because they can't actually afford the cost of living in central London, they're living in a
yeah.
tent. It's extraordinary, isn't
It,
it?
it's extraordinary. And these people I see, I'll unpack that a little bit. I see them. They come here because we provide them with showers, so they wash. Um, they have all their stuff sorted. There's another charity we help support here called Street Storage, which under the church in our crypt provides storage space for people to keep their belongings, their valuables, so that they can come here on a weekly basis and take out what they need and put back what they don't, um, and try and live a life on the street. But these people are living on the street. They're not. As she compared it to places in America, the places where people are, stuffed full of drugs and all that stuff. Yeah, of course, there's an element of that in some areas, but actually not really.
Mm.
Most of the people you see sleeping up Tottenham Court Road or sleeping along Euston Road are people who either have unresolved status in terms of their immigration and that sort of stuff, people who've fallen through the benefit system, people who've had a breakdown, or people who are just homeless through circumstance. Not everyone, of course not, but the majority. And just to hear someone say that for sort of political gain, astonishing. Actually,
Yeah,
just breathtakingly ignorant.
yeah. Well, I think there is a lot of ignorance generally around homelessness and the impoverished people in our society. Was interested what you were saying a few moments ago, Tom, about just being, we ran a food bank inside the church and we made a decision to stop that and people were kind of, well, what are you doing? But actually we've kind of transformed that into a breakfast club gathering and your point about just having the ability to sit and talk to people on a human level is the value in that is immense, isn't it? And I also think it in some ways it's good because it shifts the responsibility back. I don't know what you think about this, but I think our councils, county councils, they will allow you to do what as much as you can. So in many ways you become like an extended social worker. You're not just a priest; you're a social worker, and I feel that very much in my role. But actually, that capacity to sit with people and you actually learn about people's circumstances, don't you? You learn about their situation, and now you perhaps can help them. I just wondered if you'd like to add anything to what I've said there.
I mean, I just agree. I'm probably addicted to many things in life. I've just given up smoking actually, which is going fairly well. I think I am addicted to people. I think out of all the things, and I think the thing that brings me most life and joy is spending time with people, um, and seeing what's going on in their lives, seeing where God is working, um, seeing how we might unpack that. Um, that's exciting for me. If I have to do a
Yeah.
spreadsheet, I come out in a rash. If I have to do anything that involves like detail and sitting
Mm.
down and working through stuff like that, I'm fortunate in having people around me who are excellent at that sort of thing. I like people. I always have done. Um,
Yeah.
and St Giles is great for that because there are lots and lots of people.
People watching this, Tom, might be looking, thinking, "Cracky, Tom's a young guy to be a priest." Did you feel the call to a vocational ministry in the priesthood from a very young age, or just tell us how that came about for you?
I mean, it started bell ringing actually. Um, I was a bell ringer. I'm a great believer in the church, um, and some of it's, I mean, people come to faith in many different ways, but a lot of people come to faith through music, through scouts, and being associated with groups with the church. And for me, it was bell ringing. I was a really militant atheist, because I thought the church was hypocritical and power crazy and about controlling populations, really. That was a sort of naive opinion, I think, from an angry teenager. But also, actually, now I'm in the church, I sort of see that as a bit true as well sometimes, in some of the way the church is run by some of the people who run it. But I think, I sort of gently came to faith in my sort of late teens. I had a really, really good vicar, a chap called Ian, and he was sort of he was like an academic, and he was clever, but he was also normal and nice. And I think he gave me St Augustine's Confessions to read. And I remember reading this book that had been written, 1600 odd years ago, and just being utterly moved by this quite young man at the time who was, going on about the, bubbling impulses of youth that befogged and obscured his heart so that he could not see the difference between love's serenity and lust's darkness. Really sort of powerful and compelling stuff. And so I just thought there must be truth in it. And I started to go to church, and I started to read. And then I went to university to do theology down in Canterbury. And I remember thinking to myself, if I could just read 10% of books that are in this library, theology, I will have such a deeper faith. And actually, when I met a really wise priest in Canterbury Cathedral called Ron Diss, who's now sadly departed, and he said, no, that's wrong. The most important thing you can do is learn to pray. It's only then that you'll find your faith and find the will of God. And so I spent 3 years having a lot of fun at university, but also going to Evensong every day in Canterbury Cathedral, and learning how to pray. And that's where my calling, I suppose, was fostered and found. And so I was ordained, it'll be coming up for 13 years ago.
When you told your family that this was the route you were going to follow, were they surprised, or were they kind of, oh, Tom, we were waiting for you to tell us?
I mean, there were two things particularly, but they weren't particularly surprised about this. No, my family are not massively religious. They're those people who fit into that category that would probably describe themselves as not particularly religious, but they will always come to church with me, and they certainly do say their prayers. I think they're where lots of people are, actually. They're quite useful to mine for information about how I should do things.
Yeah.
And I always think this with, and this is just a simple point that I've made to PCCs and to people in the past, particularly to church people who are doing sort of growth, is when we start talking about mission and how we get people into church, how we attract people, ask those who are nearest and dearest to you, but who don't go. I remember talking to an older lady who said, "Oh, the trouble is, Vicar, that just young people don't come to church." And I was like, "Well, where are your grandchildren? Stop. You're sort of demonizing all these other children who are out having fun on a Sunday. Well, where are yours?" And she was like, "Oh, well, Amelia likes to do ballet on her, so she likes to go to her ballet class." I was like, "Well, she's wrong, isn't it? Shouldn't she be in church?" So I think mission starts at home, and I think asking those who are closest to you about these things is a good place to start, really.
Yeah, you get a very honest response from people who are close to you, don't you? Yeah. And you are now in a church that uses the Book of Common Prayer. Now, this is quite in the church now is probably less than more. What is it that particularly attracts you about the Book of Common Prayer, Tom?
I mean, there's a lot there. I think it's solidity in a changing liturgical landscape. it doesn't. It just is a good point of reference. I mean, people always sort of, the first thing they usually say is the language, and the language and the theology is incredibly deep and profound and challenging. You know, Cranmer's theology of sin and a call to moral correction is profound and deep. But I don't know about you, but for me that's very appealing, and I need to hear that on a Sunday, in a way. And I think that the trouble is with your sort of common worship, every single priest has a different interpretation of it. And it's so broad. I've got this theory that when the church commissioners are running out of money, they just publish another edition of common worship, another sort of pastoral rites or whatever. You've just got loads and loads of stuff. And it sort of lacks Catholicity, I suppose, in a way. So I just think there's a richness there, and you learn to sort of pray by it, and it seems to be attractive. It seems to be attractive, particularly to men under 50. I mean, that's the majority of our growth at St Giles is in that category, which is not usual for church, I think. It's a sort of missing bit in so many churches. And I think it's also, the language is quite, it doesn't pull any punches. It calls a spade a spade. And I am a sort of no-nonsense person, really, and I quite like that clarity. When I was asked this question in my interview for St Giles, which was on Zoom, and I can't remember who asked it, maybe it was the Bishop of London, said, well, why do I like the Book of Common Prayer? I said, well, it's like the warm bath you never want to leave. I think
that's a really nice way to. That's really lovely, Tom. That's a really lovely way to describe it. But I remember when I was training. I have it here. It's not. I'm just having it but it was presented by the Prayer Book Society, and I warmly received it and went on to use it with my training income. But there was a couple of a couple of ordinands there who kind of tossed it aside and said, "Oh, it's not for me. It's all, it's past its sell-by date." And what would you say? What would you say in response to those people? Because I think for me, there's a profound beauty about the words. I'm not an expert liturgist, but I do find when I do use it, it touches me in ways that other forms of worship don't.
I mean, there are two things to say to that, I think. The first is that the theology of the Book of Common Prayer is one of the key foundational building blocks of how we understand ministry and mission in the Church of England. It's how we understand God's grace towards us, working through us as presbyters and deacons, bishops in the church today. So to sort of just toss it aside and say, well, it just because it's old language, it doesn't mean anything. It's a bit like, well, you're going to go and get rid of Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica just because no one speaks that like that anymore. It's that sort of, there's a childishness to that sort of behaviour, I think. It's the same way that sort of clergy who think they're so cool because they wear like chinos and an open neck shirt, and it's like, okay, well, it's just fashion. It comes, it goes. More relevant.
Yeah.
The whole point is that it is different, and when we go to church, we do use elevated language. Common worship is elevated language. It's not the way we speak in society. No one goes around saying "the Lord be with you" or "the Lord is here" or whatever your fancy. Church is different, and the liturgical tongue is a different tongue. It is a different language. It's said in a different way. It's directed to God, and not to a fellow human being often. So I kind of think once people get that, it just needs to be explained to them. It just needs to be taught. And there's something in me that just like, I mean, the power of prayer is something that is beyond language, I think. But I kind of think that if I'm addressing God, I want to address God either, for me, it would be in silence, in my heart, in my mind, or if I'm leading worship, I want it to be respectful. I am always suspicious of prayers that begin, addressing. I went to a service once where the bishop addressed God as Daddy God, and I was just like, this has got to be a joke. Maybe he's having a stroke, because this is not what we say. Daddy God, we just wanna. I mean, I don't have children, but if I did have children, I'd correct their language on that front, because it's poor use of English, if anything. Anyway,
it's very interesting, this, Tom, because we've in our church at St Matthew's in Burnley, myself and my college occasionally use the Book of Common Prayer, but there is this kind of language barrier going on. We draw in we've recently drawn in people off the urban estates that, as you said, that common worship is a language just completely incomprehensible to them. I was wondering how you kind of. I was going to just say, I wonder how you kind of introduce people to that. You said that you've got this kind of almost like a group of people that come. I wonder, do they come forearmed? They're coming because they know you are a church that uses the Book of Common Prayer, or are these new people that come in who wanted to discover something as beautiful as this?
I mean, it's a real mixture. So, like, some people do come because St Giles uses the prayer book. Other people come because it's where they've always come, and they live in the area. Not many people live in the area, but some people do. Others come because they like the music, or it fits in with what they're doing for the rest of the day. There are mixtures of reasons, but one of the things that the Prayer Book Society, if I just mentioned that, is doing at the moment, has been really good at doing under its current leadership, has been to not see the Book of Common Prayer as the answer to all the problems, because it isn't. And there are beautiful things available to us in formality in prayer, worship that's ecstatic and charismatic, common worship. It's all there. It's all working for the glory of God. This is just particular to our bit of the vineyard. And I try and see value in everything. Obviously there's taste as well, and that varies for everyone. People would think that our services are horrendous and dull, and there are people who would go to other services and think that similar things. In terms of sort of people's ability to access the language, and you're right. One of the things we will do here when we engaging with people whose language is not English, sometimes whether people who are educated or whether people who are struggling to speak English, and in some cases can't read, which is the case, then language of that nature in the prayer book is potentially problematic. I remember working on an estate when I was an ordinand, and it became very clear that me saying, "Oh, let's stand up and sing this hymn together," was difficult, because people didn't know hymns, but B, they couldn't read. So changing the music every week, changing the liturgy every week, was problematic. Familiarity, learning things by rote, the Lord's Prayer, those sort of formulaic things have to be taught by word of mouth, I think. So yeah, I'm sort of rambling a bit, but essentially I think it can be a barrier, but it doesn't have to be if it's taught well. It's also not the hill I'm going to die on.
No.
What's going to get me to heaven is not clutching my copy of the Book of Common Prayer. It's going to be my faith in God.
Yeah, and with General Synod about to land on your doorstep in the next few days, Tom, is there any wisdom we can take from the Book of Common Prayer with the kind of the way we are as a church at the moment? There's a huge division in the church, and there's people falling out left, right, and centre. What does your experience of the Book of Common Prayer tell us? Don't say I don't know.
We may be godly. That we may be godly and quietly governed. I think that is my prayer every week at the altar, that we may be godly and quietly governed, not just in terms of our government in the Houses of Parliament, in Westminster, but in our church. And I don't get involved in church politics, because however strongly I feel about some things, I think that I perhaps feel too strongly, and I would just I just want to say to Synod that actually approaching things prayerfully is probably the best place to start. and quietly. There's a lot of tweeting and shouting and unpleasantness that I see and hear, and it's not right actually for Christians to do that, and it's not right to do it in synod. And I think the one thing I would say is, pray for those who lead us, our bishops. I think they have a horrendous time. I think a lot of it is of their own making. But I think they do have a horrendous time. I've been privy to see and hear some of the things that have been said to bishops in all sorts of dioceses and places, and I just think that would be, I wouldn't sleep at night if people spoke to me like that.
Mm.
So I think it's a really sad place we've come to, and it sort of makes me not want to be part of it. And my way of dealing with that is just to ignore it, really.
Mm-hmm.
Which is again a sad reflection on what it is to be a minister in the Church of England. I think to not to want to engage and to bury your head in the sand isn't an answer. But we're only flesh and blood, and I have my own stuff to look after here, and I have myself to look after, and I'm just not going to go down that road, really. But my prayers are always with people who go to synod, and I'm grateful for the people who represent us there, and I wish them well. That's about all I can do, really.
You've clearly got a pastoral heart, Tom, and this has kind of leads you now to your role as a padre with the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment. Was that something you were seeking, or did it kind of again come by chance, or and how much do you enjoy that role?
I mean, I absolutely love it. It's just army chaplaincy is. I think the church, actually, the parochial system, the church and those in authority have a lot to learn from the chaplain's department, and for the operation of a chaplain. It's almost like turning the clock back 40, 50 years in terms of the respect that's afforded you. It's not just given, you have to earn it. But a padre who works hard and is there for his serving personnel, his or her serving personnel, is really, really respected and cherished. And you have a great role to play in a regiment in bringing things together and bringing people together. And I absolutely love it. The Household Cavalry has obviously had a really interesting year this year, because we've had the Jubilee, and then we had the sad passing of the late Queen, and then the coronation and all of the excitement that's gone with that. Today we've just had the opening of Parliament, and I was lucky standing there and watching them all go past, and couldn't be prouder of these men and women who are doing these amazing things. It's a great place to be, and there is a desire for God. There is a real desire for faith. I think statistically, if you look at people who go to church in the army, it's much higher than the rest of society. The important thing to say is I'm not there to sort of shoehorn God into people's lives when it's convenient, or when they're vulnerable or weak, or they come to me for advice. I'm not there to say those things. I'm there to offer it if they want it, but I'm not there to sort of be a missionary in that sense. That wouldn't be tolerated, and it shouldn't be, because that's to take advantage of people, I think. But a tree is known by its fruits, isn't it? And I think if you're there and the two most important things about any parish priest or any padre or chaplain is the two things of being known and available. You're not going to be any good if people don't know you, and you're absolutely useless unless you're not available. And it drives me around the bend when clergy really say, "Oh, how are you?" and they say, "Oh, I'm just really busy." It's like, well, be less busy, or don't say you're busy. It's not a great look for clergy, actually.
I think it's something I'm guilty of, and I think that what you've just said is very wise. Is that we're very fortunate, aren't we, that we plan our own day, we arrange our own desk in many ways, and we can have say no if we want to. So I think that's a good perhaps place to finish the Godcast to priests who are watching this. But Tom, it sounds like you're very content down there in the city at the moment, and it sounds like you're doing some great work. And just perhaps give your church a plug as we finish. Tell people where you are and where they might find you in service.
Yeah. Well, I mean, St Giles-in-the-Fields, nearest tube is Tottenham Court Road. Very easy to get to. Services are 11 o'clock and 6:30 on Sunday. Holy Communion followed by evensong, supported by our choir. We usually go to the pub afterwards. Friendly bunch. Everyone very, very welcome.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Tom, for coming on the Godcast, and perhaps catch you in London sometime.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.